They built the most sophisticated civilization Britain had ever seen. Then, in a single generation, they walked away from all of it. The fires came first. Not enemy fires, their own. Bronze axes splitting oak beams, granaries emptied into rivers, whole villages, markets, temples, the homes of hundreds, reduced to ash by the hands of the people who built them. October 1000 BC. Somewhere in the valley the British called the Thames. The birds had already gone. The livestock were already dead. How does a civilization destroy itself and leave almost no record of why? Stand here, in the shadow of what they built, and try to understand what Britain looked like before the burning. Not the Britain of mud and struggle your history lessons described. Something else entirely. Something that would shock you. By 1050 BC, Bronze Age Britain was not a backwater at the edge of the known world. It was a connected, sophisticated network of settlements that stretched from Cornwall to the Scottish Highlands. Archaeologists now estimate the population of the British Isles at somewhere between 2 and 4 million, comparable to Rome at its early Republican peak. The Great Causewayed Enclosure at Marden in Wiltshire covered nearly 40 acres. Flag Fen, near what is now Peterborough, sat on a platform of over 60,000 hand-cut timber posts driven into the fen, a structure so labor-intensive that modern engineers still argue about how they built it without metal tools stronger than bronze. They had roads, not Roman roads, older ones, trackways of split oak planks laid across marshland, engineered to carry carts and cattle through terrain that should have been impassable. The Sweet Track in Somerset predates 1000 BC by nearly 2,000 years, which means British engineers were solving infrastructure problems before the Egyptian pyramids rose above the desert sand. Walk through the eastern settlement at dawn, and the smell hits you first. Bread, specifically emmer wheat baked on hearthstones still warm from the night. The sound of copper bells on cattle moving toward the water meadows. Children carrying water in ceramic pots fired at temperatures that archaeologists once assumed were impossible without kilns. The bronzesmiths were already working. You could hear the rhythmic hammering from the forge quarter before the sun cleared the ridge. The bronze was not locally smelted. The tin came from Cornwall. The copper came from Wales, from Ireland, sometimes from continental Europe. Britain in 1000 BC was not isolated. It was importing raw materials from over 500 miles away. That trade network, the thing that made all of this possible, was also the thing that was about to kill it. Because somewhere far to the east, something had already begun. Not an army, not a plague, something slower, something that had no name, no face, no moment of arrival. Climate scientists drilling ice cores from Greenland in the 1990s found it, a chemical signature in the ice layers dated precisely to around 1050 BC, a volcanic event or a series of them somewhere in the northern hemisphere. The evidence suggests a drop in average temperatures across northwestern Europe of between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius. 1 degree sounds trivial. It was not. 1 degree in a subsistence farming economy is the difference between a harvest and a famine every single year. Dendrochronologists, scientists who read history in tree rings, found it too. The oak trees of Britain between 1050 and 900 BC show growth rings so narrow they are almost invisible. The summers were cold, the rains came wrong, the crops failed, not catastrophically, not all at once, but consistently, year after year, in a slow, grinding pattern that Bronze Age farming communities had no framework to understand and no surplus to survive. The trading networks began to fray. First, the long-distance routes. The Irish copper stopped arriving. Then the Cornish tin. A bronzesmith in the Thames Valley settlement in 980 BC could not get the raw materials he needed. He could not make the tools the farmers needed. The farmers could not grow the surplus the traders needed. The traders could not justify the journey. The system ate itself. And then, the hordes began. Across Britain, in the 50 years between roughly 1020 and 970 BC, bronze objects were deposited in rivers, bogs, and buried pits in numbers that archaeologists have never fully explained. Swords, axes, cauldrons, personal jewelry, entire smithing kits, tongs, molds, ingots dropped into rivers intact. The Ileham hoard in Cambridgeshire, 6,500 bronze objects in a single deposit. The Beddington hoard, the Broadness hoard, objects of extraordinary value, buried or drowned, not lost, deliberately placed. Whatever was happening, people knew something was ending, and they were making offerings to forces they could no longer negotiate with. September 975 BC, pre-dawn, the Thames Valley. The air smells of cold mud and smoke, not cooking smoke, wrong smoke. The thick, oily smoke of structural timber and stored grain burning together. A woman named in no record, survived in no account, stands at the edge of a settlement that has housed her family for 11 generations. She is watching men she knows, her neighbors, her kin, carrying torches toward the longhouse where the winter stores are kept. This was not invasion. The nearest foreign settlement is 40 miles east. The grain stores burn in under an hour. The longhouse timbers take until morning. When the sun rises, the chalk ridge above the valley reflects light off a sky still thick with smoke. 3 families move west. They carry bronze tools, ceramic seed pots, a copper pin that belonged to a grandmother nobody living can remember. They do not look back. Looking back in a culture with no word for nostalgia serves no purpose. They are not the first. They will not be the last. Settlements across southern Britain are being abandoned in this exact pattern. Not sacked, not burned by enemies, but deliberately dismantled and vacated. Archaeologists call it the Bronze Age collapse. The people living through it had no name for it. They only knew that the old ways had stopped working and that staying meant dying slowly instead of dying somewhere else. The rivers fill with bronze. Not offerings now, panic disposal. Objects too heavy to carry, too valuable to leave whole. Blades bent double and dropped into the Thames near what is now Waterloo Bridge. A founder's hoard near the Severn. Ingots, scrap metal, unfinished castings, everything a smithing operation needs, abandoned mid-production. Whatever the smith was making, he stopped. He never came back. 50,000 bronze objects recovered from British rivers and bogs to date. The real number is almost certainly 10 times higher. Most are still in the sediment. Most will never be found. And it still wasn't over. The Iron Age that followed was not a replacement. It was a rebuilding from near zero. The population of Britain between 900 and 800 BC is estimated at a fraction of what it had been a century earlier. The sophisticated timber engineering, the trackways, the platform settlements, the lake villages largely disappears from the archaeological record. The bronze smithing tradition that had produced objects of startling technical sophistication fades. A civilization that took 1,000 years to build collapsed in roughly one human lifetime. When the sun rose over the Thames Valley in 950 BC, the settlement that had stood there was gone. The hearthstones were cold, the cattle bells were silent, the forge had stopped. What remained was a carved oak post, still upright in the mud, part of a structure nobody alive remembered the purpose of, built by people whose names had already been forgotten. One specific object survives from this period, a bronze flesh hook recovered from Flag Fen, dating to approximately 1000 BC. It is displayed today in the Peterborough Museum. It was used for removing meat from a communal cooking cauldron, a feasting object, a social object, the kind of thing you make when you believe there will always be enough to share. The community that made it was gone within 2 generations of its creation. The object outlasted everything. For 3,000 years, the Bronze Age collapse was treated as a footnote,
a vague transitional period between two more dramatic eras. But the ice cores are still being drilled, the tree rings are still being read, and climate scientists mapping the relationship between temperature variance and civilizational stability keep finding the same pattern, the same signature in the data. Cold summers, failed crops, supply chains that looked permanent and weren't, communities that absorbed one bad year, then two, then stopped absorbing it all. Does that sound like ancient history? The patterns repeat. The vulnerabilities that ended Bronze Age Britain were not primitive vulnerabilities. They were the vulnerabilities of any complex system. The brittleness that hides inside sophistication. The fracture lines that only show under sustained pressure. Human nature doesn't change, only the name